So next, let's talk about models and controllers. So we touched on this slightly a little bit before, but the models are basically the data that you're going to pass around, and the controllers are where your logic is going to sit. So a module is probably the biggest type of sort of directive, and everything is going to sit inside of a module. So the module you can think of as the container for your entire application. And you declare it pretty simply in your Angular code. So you'll have one JavaScript. We're going to basically use one JavaScript file for all your Angular code. You can, of course, separate this out a little bit more, but we don't have that much code today. So we're just going to keep it in one file. And at the top of your file, you're just going to type in var and give your module a name, and then you'll just use angular.module. And the my app here, that's going to be what you're going to call your app in your view. So right here, we're just going to give an example, for instance, my app. So this is what you would call your directive with ng app using. And next, you'll see we have some empty brackets here. The empty brackets are basically where you're going to put in your dependencies. So if you need another type of Angular resource, or if you're calling in some specific library, that's where you'd put those. Because we're starting out simple right now, we're not going to use it just quite yet. And controllers are what are going to contain, again, the business logic for a part of your application. So you can have multiple controllers per Angular module. These will typically correspond with one core function or one core view, or basically one part of your application. And controllers, basically, all they do is they set up your data to be viewed in your HTML. So you're going to, for instance, massage your data, reset it in the controller, set it different things, and you're actually going to declare it with some similar syntax. So as you recall, for instance here, we called our Angular application, or Angular module, my module. So you could just declare a controller onto that, as you see here, and give it a name, like my controller. And you'll actually give it a function here. So that's interesting, because what we're basically doing is we're going to put our code between these braces here. And you'll see we passed in a scope. So this is how we talked about before, if you need any dependencies, you eject them in the square brackets for a module. Here, if you have any dependencies, you could just simply put them as a parameter for the function. So we already have something here in its scope. Now, scope is something that just every controller is going to need, and that's where you're actually going to keep your data models. So that's essentially everything in your scope is going to be what is passed around to your views. So dependency injection is how we're going to specify those dependencies for Angular component that we need. This is basically, the scope that we're putting into our controller, and it's what we put in our square braces. Angular is very, very big on dependency injection, because that's essentially how you're going to add in only the components that you need for a controller. Instead of declaring everything, for instance, at the top and basically making everything available, you say, well, what do I specifically need for this one controller or this one module? And templates are going to be the angularized HTML that we're going to create. So
what does angularized mean?
I'm not sure that that's a real term. That's basically just what I put in. It's any HTML code that you're going to use along with Angular. So instead of saying, so we're going to just call those templates, because as you can see, or as we saw before, what you see in your browser, that code is going to be different. That's going to be actually the rendered view. But what you're using to create that sort of Angular HTML shell, which in our hello world, for instance, was this. This is going to be a template. The templates will typically, you'll see the braces, and this is and you're going to see a lot of that Angular structuring. So it's basically template is a really straightforward word. That's exactly what it does.
Angularized,
right?
like hello angularized means that it's using the double brackets, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So your templates are going to be basically the constructed views, or you know what? They're the templates for your views.
Templates, yeah.
I don't know why I keep trying to explain a really simple word. It is a template. So yeah, actually, let's go in and build out just those simple pieces for our Chirp Angular app.
Awesome.
So just to orient you guys around Sublime, for those of you who haven't used it before, you can actually access your file structure here. And we have one giant folder for our Chirp app, which I put in desktop because, easy access. I know a lot of people don't like that, but hey, it's a demo. And you'll see that I have the completed folder here, and I also just have, the rest of the folder structure here.
So the completed folder has what?
Oh, the completed folder basically has what we're going to end up with at the end of the module, but we're going to create the module from scratch in a new folder that we're going to start here. I just wanted to showcase this because if you haven't used Sublime Text before, this is not, like any crazy project view like you might see in Visual Studio. This is basically just going to be
it's just doing
the folder structure. Yeah, you're just seeing the directories as they exist here. And you can see, the other modules here, and it maps basically one-on-one to this. So I've just created this empty app folder, and this is where we're going to start off. If you want to follow along and you want some more detailed instructions, you can, of course, go to our GitHub repo. Let me go here. And as you can see, we're actually going to go through basically what we're going to do here in this Module 2 folder. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create an Angular module and a controller. And that's going to be the file that we're going to contain the rest of our code in. So I'm going to just create a new file here in Sublime, and I'm going to, you know what? I'm just going to copy paste this code in, so I can describe it to you better. So what we did here is we basically constructed a module, like we said before. We're calling this variable app, and we're going to use that throughout our application. But more specifically, it is the Chirp app, and that's what we're going to call it in the view later on. And we just constructed a really empty controller called main controller, and I'm actually going to just start passing in the scope right now and leave this blank for the time being. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to call this just chirpapp.js. Putting an application folder, and I'm actually going to put it in a separate folder called JavaScripts, just to clean that up a little bit, and save that here. And next, we're going to create that basically main page that you'll see when you're on our Chirp application. So because HTML is really, really verbose, I'm going to use this template. Otherwise, it'll take me forever to type out.
Yeah, those brackets are really annoying.
Yeah, and what we're going to do here is we're basically going to create that HTML file. So right now, this doesn't have any Angular code in it. As I would say, it is not Angularized. Sorry. I'm trying to make it a thing, okay? I'm trying to make this term happen.
Hashtag Angularized.
Angularized, yeah, exactly. And all we have in here is it's just basically a form. We're going to, within this form, we're going to have an input called your name, for your name, and we're going to have a text area for your chirp. Normally, you type in, normally you wouldn't need to type in your name if you're building an application like this because it just saved your username. But because we don't have a backend yet, we're just going to have you manually enter your name whenever you're
cheaping?
Whenever you're cheaping. Exactly. And there's going to be a submit button. I made a div for a feed down here, but that's obviously not going to be used yet. And I have an extra div here, so I'm just going to save this. And I'm going to call this main.html. So right now, if we go in and we actually look at main.html, it's not very pretty, right? It's completely unstyled, and basically I just have the name input and to say something here. And I can type in things here, but it won't really do anything since that submit button isn't connected to anything. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to start Angularizing this. And I'm going to put the ng app actually on the body instead of the full HTML document, and I'm going to call this Chirp app. It's important for what you do here to map to or what you're calling the application here with ng app to actually map to what you're going to call it here.
So I can't call it whatever I want. It has to match Angular, the module name of the Angular module name.
Exactly. And we'll also want to include this chirpapp.js file. So for time's sake, I'm going to, again, just copy this. And
so what is that there?
yeah, exactly. I'm going to explain it in just 1 second. So we're going to call in 2 scripts. One is, like we said before, we need basically the AngularJS base scripts from the Google CDN. So I'm just pulling in that CDN code here with this first script. And the second thing we're going to do is we're actually going to link this to our chirpapp.js that we created in our JavaScripts folder. So the order of that is, pretty important. You want your Angular code to go first so that your app actually knows what it's accessing. And we're going to save this. Now, this won't actually do much because we don't have a controller or anything in here. So what we want to do is we want to, specify, hey, what part of the app is this controller that we're making called main controller modifying? And what we're going to modify is basically this main div. So so whatever is basically under this div or within this div is going to be accessible with the ng controller.
Okay.
And again, it's important for this name to match with what you're going to pass into main controller, what your name is going to be here.
Oh, I got a good question in the chat. They asked, wouldn't you place the CDN link at the bottom of your file rather than the top? Sometimes you do that for loading for performance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want your site to be extremely performant, extremely fast, you absolutely should place your JavaScript includes at the bottom of the page, because the way that these things load is you'll have that first pass where you load all your elements in, and then you'll actually load, and then you'll go through and you'll load your scripts, and then that'll go through and basically connect what you're connecting with the script. This is just the very standard HTML way that people have learned.
Yep.
So I'm doing this for simplicity's sake instead of actually making anything
Nothing
super
fancy.
performant today. If we wanted to do that, we probably also do a couple of other tweaks. But this, I think, makes things very clear. So after we've added in the controller, next we want to actually connect our model and view. So because we don't actually have anything in our controller here, let's actually learn what we would put in.